So how do you feel about walking around and knowing that there's hundreds of bodies lying beneath your feet?
It's just, you kind of get used to it, you know. I mean, unfortunately, when the ground is soft, we do get bones coming out the ground. The problem with Greyfriars is there's so many bodies buried in Greyfriars, it is a case of they're on top of each other. So unfortunately, when the ground is soft and things move around, i.e. tree roots can bring up bodies. So it's one of these things you get used to. At first it's a bit, but you know, after many, many years, what happens is we usually get handed the bones in our office and we give them back to the minister, who reinterrs them in the graveyard in a special part of the graveyard where they get reburied.
So there's a history of unexplained attacks in the Greyfriars, Bobby. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, it falls under the, you know, unexplained attacks because we don't have science available to us today to fathom out, you know, what is causing these things. It's, yeah, we are into thousands, literally thousands. It's not, you know, one or two. We've had thousands of people over the 20 years since we started documenting this phenomenon, if you wish. It's, I mean, I'm not a specialist by any means, but I do know, after seeing things on tours happen to people in front of my own eyes, there's something in the locked section of the graveyard, the Covenanters prison, in the Black Mausoleum, that's not human. It's been dubbed the Mackenzie poltergeist. It's because it can leave marks, it can attack people like scratches, bite marks, burns, bruises. People, even non-believers, this is what is amazing, is I find, you know, it doesn't matter if you believe in this kind of thing or not.
Like the supernatural.
Exactly. This doesn't care. You know, if it likes you, as I say, if it likes you, it's going to let you know that it likes you.
Okay. So you mentioned George Mackenzie to us. Can you explain a little bit more about his history?
Well, George Mackenzie was King's advocate for King Charles. He had worked his entire life in law. He'd built himself up and he'd made himself, you know, the position that he got to, which was basically a lawmaker, a main lawmaker in Scotland during his time. But of course, being that high up in the law at that time, it did mean he had not a nice job to do. And he was given that job by Charles to round up the Covenanters within the Covenant movement that were causing Charles a bit of problem.
The Covenanters were a Scottish Presbyterian movement that played a very important part in the history of Scotland. How would you explain the horrific actions against them by Sir George Mackenzie?
I mean, I don't think George Mackenzie was a bad person. I think he was given a job to do, and if he hadn't done it, he would be seen as against the king. He would have been seen, being held in treason. So he would have been executed and somebody else would have done it for him. You know, I think George Mackenzie certainly gave orders, but he never, murdered somebody with his own hands. He did gain the nickname George Bloody Mackenzie, which really is not an easy feat to get that kind of nickname in Scotland in the 1600s. Some of the things that he did allegedly, allow to happen was the disembowelment of Covenanters and then hung from windows of their lodging houses or their homes, so when their families came home they would see their husbands hanging from a window with their insides, all over the ground. And of course the keeping off the 1,200 Covenanters after the Battle of Bothwell Brig within the Covenanters prison here in Greyfriars.
So Greyfriars Bobby's always had a reputation for sort of hauntings and paranormal activity and things like that. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I mean, it has been. Since 1999, when the gates of the Covenanters prison were locked, there has been a lot of reports of, hauntings. Generally graveyards are not haunted. People are, already passed by the time they get here. So to have a graveyard that is haunted is very, very rare. Basically, allegedly there was a curse put on George Mackenzie, whose tomb is just over on our right. After he was buried in Greyfriars in 1691, it was said the curse, his bones would never rest, his soul would never rest as long as it was in Greyfriars, because of the atrocious things that he had done to the Covenanters within Covenanters prison, 200 yards away from where he is buried. So since then, we think it did really start after a homeless man broke into George Mackenzie's tomb one night. He ended up falling through the floor. It's a wooden floor underneath in the burial chamber, and as he did so, he knocked the coffin of George Mackenzie. The coffin fell over. George Mackenzie's body, unfortunately, came out. Since then, that was when the first reports started happening. People made reports to the church and to Edinburgh City Council. They were coming out of the Covenanters prison area, which is, again, a distance away from George Mackenzie's tomb, coming out with scratches and unexplained marks on their bodies, like bruise marks and, of course, burn marks. And they had a sense that they were always being followed and there was always something beside them when they were in that particular area of the graveyard. But since then, I mean, there's been apparitions seen, there's been voices heard. We've had some groups recording EVP over the years. It's interesting. We've had Kieran O'Keefe, the country's most famous parapsychologist, coming out doing overnight recordings and things. So there's been a lot of interest in the paranormal. But of course, these things don't play up. They're not circus animals. It happens when it wants to happen.
So, Jamie, would you like to explain to us some of your favourite parts from the graveyard?
Well, this has to be one of the most favourite parts of the graveyard. It's real history that you can see, touch, and try and imagine how the people felt at the time that they came in here. It's just unfortunate that it is graffiti. So, for instance, on this wall over here, we have what looks like a tent, an old tent with flags at the top. I'm not too sure about the sort of bird legs at the bottom of it. It kind of makes it look like a spaceship. What I believe has happened is there's just behind us, well, in front of us now, there is the area of the Covenanters prison. Before the buildings were here, this was one big field. So what we think's happened is 1707, which we have a date on the other wall. We think just after the Union, in 1710, there was still parties going on. The place was very colourful, big tents, big, tournaments, jousting tournaments, the knights with the armour, the banners, all the family, the royal banners were up. This was something that the children and younger people in Edinburgh had never seen before. It was so colourful. So we think they've just been excited. They've been totally blown away by this colour and this whole party atmosphere that they've come straight into the Greyfriars, and they've went to work on the walls of what they've seen. We have various different tents. We've got the remains of tents. We've got a Royal Rex. There are on another part over there. But the dates we've got are 1710. We've also got 1727. We've also got a 1711 carvings from it, which I think is just absolutely amazing that it's still withheld over all these years, and it's something that we can still see and try and imagine what these children felt, or young adults possibly.
So how would you describe Greyfriars Kirkyard to anyone that's never been here before?
A huge, important historical site for not just Edinburgh but Scotland. The intricate carvings on the gravestones alone are absolutely amazing. Down on the east wall and things like that, the remains of the old parts of the old monastery still in the wall down the bottom end. There's so many little details within this kirkyard and within the tombs that a lot of people miss. It just makes it all more real. It's such a historical site, more than just Greyfriars Bobby and unfortunately Harry Potter nowadays. There's just so much more to this beautiful kirkyard.